Hello, lovely costume design class. As you know, my name is Eva Wagner, and I primarily act and sing, but I really enjoy flexing my creative muscles in the scene shop and the costume shop. I love learning new skills and techniques, and so here I am to show you my portfolio, which includes many of the techniques that I learned in the costume design class. Here is a list of the different projects I've chosen to include. Each project I decided to include because I felt that I learned something from it or I was really proud of my work. I felt like each one of these things showcased a different skill, and a lot of them helped me develop that skill as I worked on them. For my Elements of a Design project, I was really impressed with the amount of storytelling that can be done with just line and color. For the family blocks, I wanted to show that there was a difference between family and the world, and for the line block, it showed that you can come in and out of family, but you have the same core group. And for the shape block, it showed that family and the world is all made up of the same thing. It's just who you choose to align yourself with. And then for the rebellion blocks, I wanted to show that small changes have an impact. For the line block, I made it all pretty much the same color. The rebellion line is thicker and it's gray, but its small little act of rebellion is enough to affect all of the other lines around it. For the shape block, I wanted to show that as you go on with your rebellion, you're affecting the people around you and you can leave change behind you. And then for the tragedy block, I wanted to show that something can happen that changes everything. For the line block, it symbolizes an illness to me that you are going on, you're living your life, and you have your ups and downs with your illness, but then suddenly you hit a turning point and it's a rapid decline, and that's the end of that. And then for the shape block, I wanted to show loneliness and that all of the different lights that might be around you slowly get turned off, and eventually you might be the only light left showing. So I think I did a really good job of showing these things and being able to evoke emotion using just the most basic elements of design. The next project I've chosen to include is the one where we cut up a button-down shirt and turn it into a new garment entirely. I chose to make a skirt because I really like the clean look of the button front skirts, and I didn't have one, and I wanted to see if I could make one out of these shirts for the project. I really dove headfirst into manipulating the fabric and altering the shirt. However, once I had cut it, I realized that an extra large man's torso requires a lot more fabric than my waist does, so I had a lot of excess fabric around what would be the top of the skirt. I solved this problem by pleating the back of it and creating essentially ruffles on the back. I liked this because it helped give the skirt some shape and volume while keeping the front with those clean lines. Because this was a project done really quickly, the top of the skirt didn't look neat and tidy. I solved this by creating a belt out of the second shirt that I had to use, and I put a bow in the back of the skirt to make the ruffles more cohesive, and it stayed with my theme of clean lines in the front and party in the back. So yeah, this project was really interesting for me to see how quickly something can be transformed, and I think I did well with it. Another project that I think I did really well with was the one where we pulled items from stock. Sarah explained to us that this was something that happens all the time in the real world, and I was excited to just go down there and see what I could find that would fit this character. I was assigned Joan of Arc and the style of steampunk. I'm really pleased with my final product, but I'm also pleased with how easily the process came to me. This is towards the end of the class, so I had already essentially worked out how I work best in my process. So when we had our research time, I separated my research into research for Joan, research for steampunk, as you can see in my notes, and then for the sketching portion, I pulled elements that I had found in both of these and just tried different combinations of them. There's a couple things that I knew from the beginning that I wanted, like the hard lines of a corset to represent armor, and the flowing skirt, because a lot of times Joan was depicted in a skirt, and this is also really typical of steampunk. I also knew I wanted a cross to show that she was a religious figure, and I knew I needed accessories for steampunk. The biggest challenge with this project was timing. I had a lot more ideas of things that I wanted to pull, but I knew to pace myself well enough to get something on the mannequin before time ran out. So I was happy with what I got, but I think I could have done more. In some of my sketches, you can see I had planned to put some watches around the arms or some goggles or a wig up on the top, all of these to lean it more towards steampunk and a less towards just a modern looking Joan of Arc. However, I think with the time restraints, I did a good job of portraying both of these things enough that it could be put on stage and that I would be proud for it to be on stage. My favorite project that we did was the superhero project. This was our first project, so I was a little bit hesitant at first to jump in. I didn't know how to do effective decision making. I was second guessing myself a lot, wondering if this was the right answer or if I was doing things correctly or if I would get points off because something was wrong. But then I actually pulled a lot of my inspiration for this character based off of different depictions of the sun in different cultures. I decided that her superhero power would be to be the human embodiment of your customer service voice. Whenever there's somebody you don't want to deal with or you just can't talk to or somebody that's really on your nerves, Sunshine can come in and deal with them for you so you don't have to. And so I really wanted to depict this radiation of positivity and light. And so I looked at how different cultures have depicted these things, and that's in the bottom left-hand corner, bottom right-hand corner over here. And I saw a lot of just outward lines, and so I knew I wanted her to have a stiff skirt to show that going out, and the sleeves I liked because it looked a lot like the Celtic sun up in the top corner. The headband I pulled from the Greek god of the sun Helios, and her cape I pulled from the Indian sun god. Her logo, I combined the Native American sun and the Celtic sun, which actually is really interesting because those are two of my heritages, and I just happen to really like the way these suns fit together. So as I went into the project, I realized how free I was to make decisions as long as I was making decisions for a reason. And I based all of my decisions in solid reasoning, and I'm really proud of the costume that I was able to come up with. The last small project that I'm going to talk about is our research project. For this project, I was assigned chatelaines to research, and this was the only thing that was on the research assignments that I had no clue what it was. So I was really starting my research from the ground up here. This project helped me to understand how I research best, and I learned how to be confident in my research and understand that I was doing it right. Most of my research images I pulled from fashion museums, archival websites, and then some came from fashion lectures. And this is really how I like to do my research. I like visual and oral things to show what was popular at that time. So chatelaines are essentially the precursor to pockets. They're keychains that held all of the keys or a woman's profession, professional items. You could tell if she was a nurse, if she had medical equipment on her chatelaine, or if she was a seamstress, she would have sewing equipment. this project really solidified for me my ability to do research, and I'm really pleased with the knowledge that if I need to learn something, I can look it up and I can figure out what it is, even if I've never heard of it in my life. So, yeah, that's how I learned about Shuttlings. Now we are going to move on to the design projects. These are plays that we were assigned that we were tasked with designing the costumes for the characters. For Happy Days, I started with an inspiration from my family. As Winnie deteriorated throughout the play, I really saw parallels to some deterioration in family members' mental health and physical health as well. So I really drew a lot of inspiration from them, and then I began to think about, okay, well, how can she be buried? And I thought to put her in a wheelchair. So for most of Act 1, she would be in a wheelchair covered by an Afghan, and I chose to make the Afghan brown to symbolize the dirt and the mound that she was in. And then based off of that, I wasn't sure where to take this concept. I knew that when they talked about her bag, I wanted it to be a carpet bag. For whatever reason, this stuck out in my brain that her bag was a carpet bag. So then I started doing research on carpet bags, and I found out that they were popular in the 1870s. So that gave me a time period to go off of, and that really helped to develop the whole storyline of my concept. So in the 1870s, if she had a memory disease such as Alzheimer's or dementia, she might have been put in a home for, now we would say, mentally ill patients. But back then they didn't exactly know how to deal with this. So as she deteriorated more and lost more of her mental state, they might have put her in a straitjacket back in the 1870s. And so that's how I envisioned her being buried up to her neck, is by her being put in a straitjacket, which I've shown in my sketches here. So this really gave me a solid place to go with my research. So I started researching fashion of the 1870s, mental institutes of the 1870s, and then I also was inspired by the idea that maybe Willie wasn't actually there. What if Willie was a memory that she was speaking to? Because sometimes he responds, sometimes he doesn't, and as her mental state deteriorates, he starts responding less and less. So I came up with the concept that he is a picture that she is talking to. So the actor would be standing on stage in sepia tones, and she would be talking to this picture of her husband, and then that led me more towards why she might be put into a straitjacket if people realized she was talking to a dead person and thinking that he was responding. To continue that concept, once the end of the play comes and Willie comes to get her or to see her, I envisioned this being a ghost-like figure. So for all of Act 1, Willie would be in sepia tone and be essentially this picture. But then in Act 2, when we see him, I wanted him to be in color and the figure of a ghost coming to bring her into the afterlife. I researched different cultures' versions of the bringer of death, essentially, and how different cultures view death and moving into the afterlife. A lot of them were very scary and harsh, and I didn't want that to be the case. So then I started looking at angels and seeing him as an angel. And culturally, a lot of the time, angels are depicted in whites, sometimes blues. So in order to show that he was now in color, I included a lot of the blues, and made his costume light. When I rendered these, I actually drew Winnie and Willie from Act 1 on brown paper to show that they're connected to the earth, and they're still of the earth and of the moral realm, essentially. And I rendered his Act 2 costume on white paper to show the heavenly implications of it. This project, like I said earlier, really, once I got the ideas started, they built off of each other, and that was so cool for me to see and so cool for me to get to explore and run with these ideas and to have the freedom to do that. It was my first time doing renderings and sketches of people, so I learned figure drawing, that varying levels of success, but I'm actually, these ones, I took a lot of time on the sketches. I hadn't quite understood the concept that sketches are meant to be quick and meant to get ideas down on paper. Rather, my sketches were oftentimes just as detailed as my final renderings, so that was something that I fixed in future projects, that I was able to differentiate the sketches and the renderings, and the sketches then were not just practice for the renderings. For the renderings for this one, it took me a long time because I was making each decision. I was deciding, do I want to outline it in marker? How do I want to draw his face? How do I want to draw his nose? As I learned how to do them, I saw them coming faster and faster because these ideas had already been decided, and I already was settling into my feeling of how I do renderings. So I'm proud of this concept, and I'm proud of my renderings. The next show we designed was The Fantasticks, and this gave me experience working with a soundtrack as well as a script. So this gave me more inspiration to pull from, and when listening to the soundtrack, it sounded a lot like a Disney plot line and storyline to me. So I started researching Disney and different ages of Disney, and I settled on the Silver Era, which occurred from 1950 to 1967. This gave me the allowance to explore real world versus story world, and that's the concept I ended up running with, was that the children were playing dress up, and they were putting on the costumes of a prince and a princess to play this romance story out. The fathers were of the real world, and so I looked into what kinds of different low income housing they could be from, because I wanted to play with the idea of escapism, that the reason the children were dressing up and playing prince and princess was to escape poverty that they had in their actual life. Elgayo was a tricky character for this concept because he is both in the story and not. For this reason, I chose to put him in black and white and make him a gangster of the 50s, because he's pulling the strings, he's doing some sketchy things, and black and white would symbolize ink on a page, as he is the narrator. Since I had established this differentiation between the play world and the real world, I needed ways to still connect the parents to their children. I did this using color schemes, and Louisa and Belle are in reds and pinks, while Matt and Huck are in blues and greens. This symbolizes both West Side Story and Romeo and Juliet, because this story really has a lot of the same feelings, and it's almost playing off of those well-known stories that we all know. Our final project was The Importance of Being Earnest, and one of the biggest things this project did for me was to show me how to budget my time. I knew that it was going to be a lot of costumes that I had to design, and I'm really, really pleased with my ability to spread those out over the course of a week instead of doing them all 2 days before they were due. That I think helped me to not get burnt out with this project and to stay interested in it. It also, as a whole project, helped to really solidify for me the idea that I enjoy visual and oral research. I watched fashion lectures on the 1890s, and I, again, looked through a lot of museum archives to find images that I could use for inspiration. Although the time period put a lot of restraints on what types of costumes I could put them in, I could only put them in costumes from the 1890s, I had a concept that I felt was important to portray, and that was underlying themes of homosexuality. Oscar Wilde was openly gay in a time when that was illegal, and I think this story does a good job of paralleling some of the silly restraints that we put on love. For instance, Lady Bracknell won't let Jack and Gwendolyn get married because he cannot produce proof of his birth parents, even though he is extremely wealthy. This parallels stupid rules about who you can and cannot marry based on how society sees you. And this is, in the story and in real life, solved by realizing we're all the same. In the story, it was revealed that he is part of the same family and they're essentially all the same. And so that's how we can overcome these silly barriers put on love. So I wanted to make all of the costumes very brightly colored and incorporate all of the colors of the rainbow to represent the pride flag. And that was a way that I was able to stay true to the time period while still intertwining a concept. This concludes my presentation of my costume design portfolio. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at my email, evawagnerarts@gmail.com. Thank you.